Good morning. Thanks for the invitation and for the introduction, Susan. We're both very happy to be here. The Schuylkill River has figured very prominently in the William Penn Foundation's grant-making, environmental grant-making for decades, so it's really a thrill to continue to be part of that and to hear about the River of the Year designation. So I'm going to give you some background, and then Nathan will give more detail. So I'm sort of the generalist, Nathan's the scientist at William Penn, so our presentations will reflect that. So just to begin with the William Penn Foundation, there are a lot of familiar faces here, but so many of you know this already, but I think others maybe don't, is a family foundation based in Philadelphia, established in 1945 with a current endowment of about $2 billion that generates about $90 million a year in grants. The foundation then makes grants in 3 areas. The environment area that we'll talk about today, and also education, which is focused on Philadelphia, and creative communities, which is also largely focused on Philadelphia. The foundation went through a strategic planning process in 2012, and because of an increase in the corpus and the various other factors with some transition to the foundation, and the strategic plan was completed, and we began implementation last year. So Nathan and I will be talking about one part of that strategic plan. I also, a couple of things I just wanted to mention. I worked for 10 years for the Pennsylvania Environmental Council, and when I worked in the nonprofit sector, I helped to write a lot of proposals to foundations. And to be honest, it never really occurred to me that foundations had strategies themselves. I knew that they had buckets that they gave grants in, but the William Penn Foundation, to its great credit, the Haas family and the foundation thinks very carefully about how its grants combine and how they aggregate and align and have impact. And that's something that has been progressively being articulated more clearly over the years. So we're hoping that that's what comes through today, is this idea of aligning and targeting and measuring impact with private investment dollars. So, oops. Probably can't everyone, I don't think everyone can see that, but anyway, so under our new strategic plan, the geography for the environmental grant making, watershed protection grant making, has been expanded from the lower half of the Delaware. We for years had a watershed approach to our grant making for the environment, but we only focused on part of the Delaware watershed. Now we're focusing on the entire Delaware watershed. And the focus is entirely on the protection and restoration of water quality. So whereas in the past we had an environment and communities program, it's now a watershed protection program as of 2012. We realize that in spite of having a large grant-making budget for a private foundation, it's $25 million a year in grants. That's a literal drop in the bucket, as you all know, in the context of the work that has to be done in the Delaware. So we've really made an effort to, whoops, I won't learn how to do this. So we've made an effort, a serious effort to figure out how we can best target the $25 million grants that we're making every year to try to maximize impact. So we're interested in prioritizing the places we work and the issues that we're addressing. So it's the geography and the topics. It's essential for us to understand baseline conditions. So as we're doing our grant making, what were the conditions like before the grants were made? So we can get a sense of whether there's been an impact of our grants over time. Clearly, we need to fund strong and effective organizations. So our grant making really is about trying to achieve change. It's not. There are some foundations that do great work, and their funding is about building capacity of small organizations and that kind of thing, which is a terrific thing to do. The William Penn Foundation has made the decision to fund fairly strong organizations or very strong organizations that can deliver and actually have impact. And then we're definitely in this approach, even more than in the past, looking for ways that our grants can complement and leverage public funding and funding from other funders. So we think a lot about, we pay close attention to what DCNR is doing and other foundations working in the Delaware watershed. But as some of you know, there aren't a whole lot of foundations working in the Delaware. So the criteria that we tend to look at, or that we looked at when we were doing our strategic plan, included these targeting, scale, metrics, replication, ability to expand projects, the capacity of the organization, and the alignment of the work that any one organization we fund is how that's aligning with work that others are doing. So it's really about trying to achieve critical mass in targeted places. That's also the way we look at proposals when they come in. So this informed our strategic planning. It's also informs the way we look at proposals. I'm obviously a tech guy. So I'm going to say a little bit about our three grant-making strategies. The three strategies are a watershed-wide strategy that's looking at the entire basin, where we're thinking about policy and research and data at the big scale in the Delaware. The second is about building the constituency for clean water, and in that case, we're focusing on people who are, by choice, outside on the water or on trails next to the water. And finally, which Nathan will talk a little more about, for the on-the-ground work that the William Penn Foundation has historically funded, land conservation, stream restoration, outreach to municipalities, we're actually we have selected geographies within the basin where we're making grants for that kind of work. So the first, watershed-wide, as I mentioned, it's really about, this is where our support for research, data, monitoring, campaigns, that kind of thing that affect the whole watershed or a lot of the watershed. Those grants are clustered in this bucket. The focus that we've selected is protection of forested headwaters, reduction of the volume of stormwater, the reduction of polluted ag runoff and improvement of best practices to minimize ag runoff, and aquifer depletion. So those are four stressors that we've decided to address through our grant making in each of these three categories, primarily the first two. They're obviously big stressors, but what we're trying to do is focus on research, data, policy that relate to those stressors. And some of the fun examples of grants that we've made under this, and we will be making under this strategy, one to the Academy of Natural Sciences in January for monitoring in 55 places around the basin, which we think will be unprecedented to have one organization with significant credibility and expertise monitor one entire watershed in multiple places, and that work will be connected to other projects we fund. So we think that we'll have this network of monitoring that will be really powerful over time. Another example of our watershed-wide grant making is our support for the Delaware Riverkeeper Network. Maya and Shari's work is just obviously incredibly important in the Delaware and in subsections of the Delaware. So, but that's sort of, it's not about a specific place, it's about every specific place. It's about policies related to the stressors I talked to. It's about being able to sort of galvanize action as issues arise. So that's the way we're looking at our watershed-wide grant making. Next is thinking about building a constituency for water protection, and we're really focused in this. We thought a lot about how to get people outside, how to get people off couch potatoes out to get them engaged. But we decided, we're based in Philadelphia, and just with our experience of supporting trails in Philadelphia and in the region, the Schuylkill River Trail in Philadelphia, the Schuylkill banks, I think the statistics recently have been that on a good week, in a good week in the summer, there can be approaching 17,000 people on the Schuylkill Banks Trail. And that trail is within spitting distance of the Schuylkill River, so there are thousands of people out right by the trail. That's true here in Pottstown too, people out on the trail. So we're really interested in thinking about how we can creatively and with innovation connect people. We're not going to get all of those people into environmental education classes, but through art, through various kinds of technology, through various kinds of program, we think that we can capture or convey the message about water quality to thousands of people who are on trails in the greater Philadelphia area. So we're supporting the circuit, which is the 750-mile connected rail trail network, which includes the Schuylkill River Trail, the Perkiomen, the Wissahickon, many other trails in the region. And then we're thinking about specific targeted centers on the trail that we would fund as a network. So thinking about what Kim Murphy's doing on Angelica Creek in Reading, the center there that they're developing, the facilities right here with the Greenway Association and Montgomery County Community College, downstream Fairmount Waterworks Interpretive Center, down below that Bartram's Garden, which has direct access to the Schuylkill River Trail, which is being built there. We've always in the past supported these kinds of places individually. Now we're interested in supporting about 20 of them as a network that we're going to try to develop into a really vibrant asset in the Delaware collectively. Not sublimating any individual identities, but sort of thinking of it as a whole, and how can we build on that. So just to give you a sense of the third strategy, which Nathan will talk more about, I mentioned, so we're looking watershed-wide, that's the Riverkeeper, that kind of work, where there are these big issues we support. We're looking at people outside, that's trails and centers and some programs. All of that's very targeted to these four stressors I mentioned and specific places. A new thing, but that's just very, very consistent with the Foundation's prior approach to grant making. Our third category, our targeted sub-watershed grant making, which is the bulk of this $25 million a year program, is really something new for us, and gets to a little bit of what Susan was referring to, where we as a large private foundation have made a decision to try to aggregate our grants and align our grants in a way using science and data to pick places to work, and then fund strong organizations in those places to achieve very clear outcomes, and then have a monitoring regime set up so we can measure and talk about the impact in those places, and then also support modeling and other methods to try to extrapolate and apply work that's successful in these targeted places to other places in the Delaware. So it's very practical, but it's got a lot of moving parts, and we've put a lot of time into thinking about where we want to work, where we want to do that, and who we want to fund, and how we'll measure that. So just quickly, to give you a sense of what we did, we worked with the Academy to look at 400 Huck 12s in the Delaware Basin to try to identify where there were clusters of the best and the worst, sort of was the way we went at it, with the idea that the Foundation's funding would be most useful in the places that were in the best condition, where we'd fund work that would try to protect that and maintain that. And then also in thinking about where the water quality was in the worst condition, where we could fund efforts to make it better. So we went through a process with the Academy of Natural Sciences and the Open Space Institute to very methodically identify places to work. I won't go into this, but Nathan will talk a little bit about how we did this. 400 Huck 12s, it's pretty hard to target when you have 400 opportunities, but we looked at the best and the worst, and I'm sorry I don't think everybody can see that, but we really did go through a very methodical approach. It's not perfect, but it was informed, and it was prolonged, and we had a lot of input on this, and we ended up with a number of candidate sites. And once we had the candidate sites, we looked at them for thinking again about our funding. What's the potential for William Penn with our grants to have significant impact in those places? what's the urgency to act? Some places there wasn't urgency, some other places there was, and that was pretty clear. What's the capacity of organizations working in those places? We make grants to others to do work. We're not doing it, so we have to really look at who's doing work on the ground, and that was an important part of our thinking. What's the efficiency? How cost effective can the work that we would fund be? So in other words, can we leverage, can we really have an impact with the dollars we have available? And finally, is there an ability to measure the impact of the work? Because the whole idea that we as a private funder support work to have effect on the ground, but also we want to cause it to be able to happen more at a greater scale, perhaps informing public agencies, perhaps informing other funders. So we thought about all of this, and we came up with 8 clusters. We call them clusters. They're actually clusters of HUC-12s that we refer to as sub-watershed clusters. And we've developed strategies in each of these places, and we recently our board approved 49 grants to about 45 organizations to do work in these places that's been carefully thought out, that will be done over 3 years with a monitoring component built in. And in addition to that, our board approved a $7 million fund for restoration projects in these places and a $10 million fund for land conservation in these places. So the idea, as I've said repeatedly, is to think about where to work, what issues to work on, how to align the work, and then put money into it to try to build momentum. So our board has approved $35 million in grants to begin to implement this strategy. And we think that creates a platform for other funders to be able to support work that's related to this network or this frame. And also we think that the $35 million of work will provide a critical mass that we think can really have significant impact in each of the places where we're funding, but also will really fuel this idea of replication. And you all work locally. You all know that it's challenging. It's important to think about the place you're working, but it's also essential to think about how the larger whole that affects the place you're working is faring. So what we're trying to do is balance the look at the big and the investment in the local in a way that they can be complementary and mutually reinforcing. So Nathan is going to tell you more about how, with these grants we've just made, we're going to measure impact, and we're going to think about assessing effectiveness.
So it's exciting. It's really exciting to see this work go forward with the planning phase that we put together with almost 50 organizations in this compressed time frame. It was an aggressive schedule, but ultimately enabled us to move from planning in April of last year to implementation in April of this year, with capital grants being awarded in the coming months and the work really getting underway to make this $35 million over 3-year project get started and really get that impact that we're so interested in. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some insights from that process, some additional detail about the criteria that we think about when we look at grants, thinking really from the perspective that's used to organize this conference, right? Thinking about sharing practice, thinking about information and tools that can help this work be a success and help our program be a success as well. So this is a quote from a survey that we gave, an anonymous survey that we gave our partners, some of whom are going to be present in this room. So anonymous online survey to get some feedback on how that process of collaboration, how that partnering and targeting play out, and what were some of the reactions to it. So certainly one of the benefits of the targeting process that you can read up there for yourselves is that it helped us get started quickly. Picking some places to work, constraining ourselves to a geography, constraining ourselves to a set of issues really helped us focus and get started. And that must be recognized. We must recognize that in that context there's a lot of other geographies that are really important to the Delaware watershed, to the Schuylkill River watershed, and there are a lot of other issues. I mean, absent from this list, we don't see fracking fluid, we don't see pharmaceuticals or toxic waste. So this is just a subset of those non-point source stressors that we can focus on and really think we can make a difference by addressing head on. So that image you see right there, it's the priority places even within the cluster geography. It's an 8 million acre geography, and we managed to focus on 8 specific clusters. But even those clusters are huge areas, and our partners have, again, focused on priority areas within those clusters, and even one step further, we need to be thinking about the projects that are actually going on the ground. So the targeting process, it persists from our level at 30,000 feet all the way down to the level and role of the practitioner. So scale is another big question. We're trying to change water conditions over a 13,000 square mile geography, right? We want to save the world here, but we've got to manage our expectations. We've got to be humble about what we think we can accomplish and what's realistic. And certainly we heard that from our partners engaging with us in this process, where we see that there's a clear recognition that measuring change is going to take time, and that there's a lot of complex factors out there that are going to play out as the process gets underway, and a lot of really hard issues that are going to be tough to address. So we have $25 million to spend per year in this program, and wow, that's a lot of money, and we are so lucky that the foundation and our board has chosen to commit those funds. But what can we hope to accomplish with these funds? I think it's important, again, to weigh them against a few other criteria, a few other things. So when we take this into funding is relative. When we consider other private sources of funding that are coming into our region, the William Penn Foundation wedge of that pie gets a little bit smaller. If you factor in some select federal sources of funding, a little smaller still. We look at even municipal efforts, like the efforts of the city of Philadelphia in their plan to control stormwater, which is going to be ultimately a $2.5 billion program over 20 years. Again, it's smaller still. And these are just the resources, some of the resources that are available. When we take these into consideration with the need that's being expressed by our partner, I think it, again, really puts things in perspective and forces us to take a step back. We've got Governor Markell in Delaware, in the state of Delaware, talking about a $700 million need for water infrastructure and conservation work to address their dirty water issue. We've got the New Jersey Keep It Green Coalition talking about a need for $200 million a year just for conservation open space issues. Similarly, in Pennsylvania, we had the Growing Greener Coalition come together just over these past 2 days to think about how they can, get progress in getting $165 million a year at least. That was the previous Growing Greener funding level to get that kind of funding available again for Pennsylvania in open space. So again, scale is important to consider. But impact can be relative too, and this is again where are the boots touching down on the ground, and how can the work that you all do in your practice with your organizations, how does it fit into this? Right? The scale of the basin, as I mentioned, 8 million acres. It's a huge geography. Even with our clustering process, we're looking at 20,000 acres for a typical cluster. The unit of analysis, right, within that cluster selection process was that HUC 12. That's the, so 500,000 acres, was the cluster. 20,000 acres for, a given HUC 12. Well, that's not quite right, but, no, that's acres, yeah, so that is correct. And then the scale of the project site. So we have 4 acres for the scale of a typical project site. So there's a red dot in the middle of that green circle that not everyone's going to be able to see. But again, just to convey that sense that to impact the scale of the entire basin is going to take some creative, some innovative, and it's going to take the expertise that's in this room and your other partners as well. So tips like, again, communication is going to be important, data is going to be important, collaboration. This isn't news to anyone, but as we know, there are problems, there are challenges inherent with the need to do that as well. So we spoke to metrics. Another thing that's going to be really important is measuring the impact, measuring the results that we want to see, so that we know whether we've achieved success, and we know when we're achieving success and when there's a course correction. And this is certainly a real challenge, and a real challenge for our partners, as expressed in this survey. We've got people recognizing that there's just, it's hard to get hands on the data. We have, partners like Susan's group at Stroud is doing wonderful work collecting macroinvertebrate and water quality sampling, but that's not present everywhere, or not present everywhere to the same extent. And it's going to be those kinds of indicators that are really important to understanding, how we're doing in this work. So predicting and tracking results, it's about understanding what our final objective is. The William Penn Foundation is very much focused on water quality and water quantity, but we recognize that our partners have slightly different ends, and it's going to be important to understand how the work that you do how the work that you do relates to water quality or relates to other outcomes that are of interest to your organization, like biodiversity and habitat. But again, it's a logical process of connecting the work that you're doing on the ground to outcomes that are relevant to your mission. For us, we're looking at how acres restored connects to stormwater volume reduced, connects to water quality. Or we're looking at how connecting the circuit trail segments increases use, which increases awareness, which leads to actions on behalf of greater environmental stewardship. Or again, how that streams classification for trout habitat can lead to additional protections, which can preserve our forests and preserve environmental flows and ample water quality in our streams. So at either one of those levels, either steps along that chain, there's a metric there. There's a metric there which is an opportunity to track progress, to track your success. Whether it's the water quality metric all the way at the end, whether it's the stormwater, whether it's the classification, as long as we can understand the relationships and use a combination of modeling and monitoring to make connections between the work that you're doing and the outcomes you want to see, I think we can really use metrics to, again, track progress, make course corrections, and get additional value out of that work. And of course, it's not going to be easy. It's going to require us to use all the tools in our toolkit, from the professional monitoring side to the citizen science and volunteer monitoring as well. So replication and expansion. We saw the size, we saw the footprint of the actual projects on the ground compared to the scale of the basin. It's going to be essential for us to scale up the projects that are successful and to replicate the models that are best practices. So this idea of scaling up from pilot projects and case studies is very much present in our work, both in the target sub-watershed strategy and our watershed-wide strategy as well. We're working again with partners in this room, including our host, the Delaware River Network, to look at stream buffer issues across the entire state of Pennsylvania. When we look across the basin, we see that there is a huge need for greater protections for our stream corridor. Stream buffers have a huge impact on water quality, but when we look at the state and federal level, you can see in this image here that there is something like 13,600 miles of unprotected stream corridor, inadequately protected stream corridor with no protections at state or federal level. So that image right there, the green is the protected stream corridor across all 4 states in our basin, and the blue is currently unprotected at the state level. But in addition to the state protections, there's the efforts that the counties and municipalities are doing as well. But again, there's 500 municipalities across the entire basin, almost 300 in just Pennsylvania alone, so it's really essential where to target. When we do an assessment, which is represented in this other figure, assessment of where is the forested area concentrated along that stream corridor? Where are our intact forests that don't currently have protections? Well, we see a few counties pop out, and one of those counties is Chester County in the Brandywine-Christina River Basin. So there's a place for us to start. It's a location of one of our target sub-watersheds. It's a place where we can get started on the ground. And our solution, we think about 2 or 3 municipalities working with the Brandywine Conservancy and Wes, who I know is here, to actually see case studies, pilots implemented on the ground in real places to really make a difference. And then the successes from those case studies can inform a broader advocacy campaign with potential watershed-wide significance, certainly potential statewide significance, because ultimately our interest is in getting those impaired streams, getting that red to blue. So that's an image of the impaired streams in Pennsylvania. We want to restore that degraded water quality, get those ecosystems, get that water quality up and functioning again. So capacity is, of course, always an issue. And straight from our survey respondents, I wish I had more time or more capacity, right? One or the other. It's a balance. How can we do more with the resources that are available to us? Well, certainly it's all about partnering. We as a foundation, we're a professional staff carrying out a family's mission, but we rely on you, the professionals in the field out there with boots on the ground to get this work done. We currently have active grants with 82 partners, so 82 organizations out there doing this work with the William Penn Foundation's direct support, but that's just part of the network, right? That's part of the partnering network. Our partners multiply that impact manifold, and the example here is from the Lower Merion Conservancy, who has a direct grant with the foundation to do work on the ground, and then in turn regrants or provides contracts with at least 4 other conservation organizations to, again, magnify the impact, because it's important that we have a local presence for this work, because ultimately that's where the real change is happening at that scale. So with so many partners, with so many issues, alignment is going to be essential. And we've gained some lessons and some insights from the process that we're facilitating, some of which are reflected up here on the screen. Certainly folks are excited about the opportunity to achieve more impact by working together than by working separately. But there's also a lot of challenges with that process of collaboration and reconciling your organization's mission with another organization's mission. Yours is maybe water quality and quantity. Theirs is perhaps ecosystems and biodiversity. But still there's opportunity to address everyone's question of what's in it for me and reach a mutually beneficial destination, achieve a mutually beneficial goal. So this, in the sense and the spirit, again, of sharing practices, getting right to the heart of what's in it for me when you're pursuing partnering, I think can be really successful. This is an example of funding that's related to our centers and trails work. Lardner's Point was a heavily degraded, heavily contaminated site along the Delaware River within the city of Philadelphia. It had been the site of an oil spill. It had been a toxic waste site. It had coal deposits, kept there for years, heavily degraded, abandoned, not providing access, not providing habitat. But because of an opportunity with available restoration dollars, and because there were multiple bottom lines, multiple interests that could be served by partnering, by bringing multiple organizations together, that's just a subset of the partners that ultimately came together, either from the perspective of habitat and living shoreline, or riverside access and recreation, or the toxic legacy contamination issues, came together, restored this site, and transformed it into the incredible asset that it is today, a place for trails, a place for fishermen, just a great community resource and a great natural resource as well. So again, we want to think about the strategies for bringing our partners together, for using one another's insights, using one another's resources. And just a few key questions to consider. How are partners coming together in a new way? How is this process that the William Penn Foundation is supporting with the clustering and the alignment of teams, how is that playing out? I think a lot of people are curious, and certainly there's a lot riding on this. There's a lot of investment from the foundation, and we're very much committed to making this process a success. Well, so these are results taken directly from the survey, so a little bit of interpretation is needed, but the green there, green is good, red is bad, from our perspective. And 85%, that's an agree with that statement. So 85% of our survey respondents agree that the team that the group developed adds up to more than the parts. So the whole is greater than the sum of the parts because of this work. And that's exactly what we want to see. That's really reaffirming, really encouraging. Well, what are some of the strategies that enabled that? What can we learn about what practices in that teaming and collaboration process were helping us to achieve that kind of goal? And certainly having buy-in from your community stakeholders, knowing your community stakeholders is essential. 94 and 89% agree that community stakeholders have been identified and that strong relationships exist with those stakeholders. Likewise, it's important that the process of collaboration be open, be transparent, be respectful. And again, that's no surprise to anyone, but it's reflected in the data we collected from you folks, you our partners, where it's important to make sure all members are involved, and it's important to make sure that no point of view is marginalized. Likewise, it's very useful to designate roles. So in the decision making, we had the luxury of being able to, the foundation, using our partners, using science, using the Academy and OSI to pick some places to move forward rapidly. Likewise, our cluster organizations are telling us that in designating roles and delegating responsibility according to highest and best use, that's helpful. That's helpful for the process. Likewise, agreement on which strategies, and that's helped to foster agreement on which strategies ultimately were selected to be part of the plans. So that's a lot of green on the screen there, but it hasn't always been perfect, I have to admit. So this next one, team members of my cluster are in agreement on the order in which the strategy should be implemented. So who gets to go first? All the strategies get included in the plan, but who gets to go first? Well, only 55% of our respondents agreed to this provision there. And as a funder, we're used to having people agree with us. So 55, it doesn't sound bad, but it caught our attention. It caught our attention. Likewise, we have a nice, nice green, 74% agreeing that the process was effective. Ultimately, this process of bringing all these people into this collaboration process was effective. But what about efficiency? Well, only 55% agree that the process was efficient. Effective, yes. Efficient, no. So we need to think about what tools, what practices can we bring into this process to help make ourselves not only effective but efficient as well. And this is where we can think about the role for 21st century technology. We're using a number of great, really kind of interesting and exciting collaboration tools, and these are a few examples just to share with you folks. Certainly we heard this in the process of collaboration from our clusters, but the wiki-based collaboration tools, data access, getting access to the data, being able to do analysis to the data. We're using databasin.org, a free resource that's available to everyone. I encourage you all to check it out. Likewise, Arcgis Online. The Esri suite of Arcgis tools is really powerful. As a nonprofit, you're eligible for a $50 license, which is highly, highly, highly discounted. So some really great tools. And certainly the need for that kind of tool is reflected in the feedback we got from the cluster. So we put together these great resources, these great technologies, and that solved all our problems, right? Well, not exactly. Not exactly. So again, I'll end on this, that there's no free lunch, that these tools were put together, but again, only 33% of respondents thought that the Dropbox.com tool, file sharing tool, was useful in the planning process. Only 11% were able to get value out of the database. And so despite putting these great resources, I think that's changing. We're seeing our usership change over time, but you have to be deliberate. You have to unroll these technologies in a deliberate fashion with support, with training, with that help desk function, if they're going to be successful. So thank you.
Do we have time for some questions?
Plenty of time to take questions. If I can grab the second microphone from you there, I can sort of run around and get questions on.
The key point, just in summation, is we have $25 million a year. We're trying to aggregate it, pick the places to work, and then make aligned grants. But we understand that those partnerships are not easy things that you can invent like that. So what Nathan was describing is our effort to talk to the people who are doing these aligned grants to understand what their needs are, and also how our process is not exactly perfect, but we're trying to evolve this into something where we really have a framework that we think can drive both targeted work and alignment and then replication. So.
Okay, let me.
Will you make the presentation available online?
The presentation will be available. If you've noticed, it's being videotaped. This is one of, there will be a total of 10 presentations that will be from today will be available online subsequently, and this will be one that will be available online. Watch our YouTube channel for this year's Watershed Congress sessions to be posted. Next question. What else do we have here?
Will some of the other watersheds within the Delaware Basin be eventually maybe eligible for some of these $25 million follow-up grants? Because there are equal needs and equally good ideas available to put into action.
That's an important question. So it's also an opportunity to reiterate that we recognize the challenges and the downsides of targeting, because when you target, it means you're not doing something somewhere else. So we recognize that, and none of this, I think Nathan touched on that, we're not suggesting that there isn't important work to be done in other places, but for the way we're applying our investments, we really want it to be able to focus and then be able to replicate. So the replication is where we hope that as we're doing work on the ground and we're keeping an eye out for where there are other opportunities that could pop up. We don't want to be just, with our funding, we don't want to be pulled to various places randomly. We're looking for other places where there's a convergence of opportunity, ability, sort of scale of impact that we could apply in other places. So these clusters, this strategy we just discussed is roughly a 10-year time frame on the part of the foundation, thinking about a 10-year commitment, which can always change, but that's where we are now. The grants we just made are 3-year grants. we understand you can't turn water quality around in 3 years, but it is about momentum and projecting. And so in that process, toward the end of 3 years, it's very possible, and we hope likely that in some places, work will have been so successful that, you know, maybe another 2 years in that place for us, and maybe that opens up opportunities in other areas as we learn about other opportunities. But what we want is to have concerted effort in these places so that we can have impact and then really solid work to export, essentially. But we're being focused but not rigid, but we are trying to be focused in these places.
How long do you monitor a project, particularly restoration projects, and are those data available to people to share about what works and doesn't work?
Sure. So the initial investment for monitoring is over 3 years. That's been made already. But the feedback from the partner shows, and we think our board is going to be able to commit to a 10-year time frame for monitoring. And think about monitoring a 10-year time frame to see real and significant results. And as far as the data is being collated by the Academy of Natural Sciences right now. It is available and will be eminently available for access via their servers for the practitioners actually engaged in the work. But that's just an initial interim step for a plan to share it watershed-wide and make it publicly accessible.
And that's part of our strategy, is to have the data and then to make it visible and to make the work visible. We have a very small, lean staff, so we don't have a big communications arm, but our goal is to have robust communications that talks about all of this work in a way that people looking at it online or whatever can understand how the work of a project sort of relates to these expanding, the larger whole. And we're also doing a lot of talking to public agencies as well about our monitoring, and we're beginning to find anecdotally, and I think that when we start to really concentrate on this, that others will be really interested in connecting to the monitoring framework, which then will feed itself.
Good morning. I was wondering, for some of these practices, particularly in the Brandywine cluster, you're going to need some engineering and technical services, particularly when it comes to implementation, design and implementation. Have you built funding into that, or the nonprofits, because they don't particularly have the ability to do that, have you built funding into the program?
Yes, so it's never enough, but that's the $7 million restoration fund, capital fund, that we established through a grant to the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. And in that case, the capital is for the design and implementation, so it's the people and the plants and the actual work, the expertise to actually do restoration projects. And those will be competitive re-grants, so not every project that we're funding staff-wise is guaranteed getting that funding, but many of them will. So that's the way we were approaching building in that expertise. And then we're also highly encouraged because NFWF, National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, which is national in scope, which has a heavy emphasis on restoration and in bringing money to a place to provide technical assistance and expertise, has not just because of us, but because of the work that Maya's done and for other reasons, they're interested in coming to the Delaware watershed in a more prominent way. So we think that we can, over time, work with them to bring more money for more of that kind of expertise. Did you want to add anything? Okay.
I guess I'm up. My question is, what would you say the average amount of your grants would be?
I should know that, but so the grants in general, I can give you the range of the sizes that we make. I don't know what the average is, but we're a large foundation. We have a small staff. We don't do small grants. We don't do $10,000 grants. We virtually never do at that scale. We do grants from really a minimum of about $80,000 up to these large grants, and there are a lot of those. I'd say there are a lot more in the neighborhood of 150 to 200,000 a year over several years. And then we have a few outliers where we do multiple $1-million grants, but typically those are to really capitalize something that then is spinning off other smaller grants from that. I should know that, and I apologize for not knowing that, but
I got a question about the circuit funding.
yes. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, sure. For the circuit funding, how far along you in identifying the environmental centers, and when is the grant cycle?
So we have about 20 that we've identified internally that we need to. Our staff effort has been primarily put into the sub-watershed work that Nathan went into detail on. We're turning to the center part of it now. The circuit work itself, the trail work, is something that the foundation had been funding under our prior strategic plan, so that was a little more mature. The center idea is new for us, and so it'll be, I think, more of a planning phase for the next several months where we'll invite people to come in to talk about what we can do and how we could add value with that. So we've made some test grants to some organizations that we had relationships with. So for example, Kim Murphy, her recent grant has some money for the Angelica Center and Fairmont Waterworks Interpretive Center and Bartram's Garden. But we have not actually yet funded this idea of a network. I'm hoping that by the fall that we'd be able to start making some grants, but at least in the meantime, we'll be getting people together. Are you with an organization that?
Delaware Riverkeeper Network, but just thinking about everything.
Yeah, no, that's great.
Andy, I'm wondering, Carol Collier did a masterful job of keeping fracking out of the Delaware watershed.
Yeah.
This is a real existential threat, I think, to the entire watershed. And I was wondering if you were addressing that, obviously not in this program, but
Yeah.
in related programs.
So, yeah, and that's a good question. So Jim was asking about fracking and how we're addressing drilling in the Delaware. That in the terms of our three grant-making categories, it's covered by our watershed-wide, where we think about policy and campaigns, and then it's touched on somewhat in the sub-watershed strategy for our Pocono, Kittatinny cluster primarily, I guess. And so a couple of answers related to fracking and the William Penn Foundation. We don't have our Marcellus Shale strategy. We have a strategy that's looking at protecting forested headwaters, and we're very interested in looking at the impacts of energy development on forested headwaters. So the way we're getting at it is primarily through looking at protecting and driving protection of those intact forests. And then also on the research side, the science side. Anything you'd want to add to that?
I would say I'm happy to I can share great affection for Carol and Carol's work, and actually the announcement has just recently been made public, and you'll hear more about it, but we were pleased to be able to support the Academy of Natural Science of Drexel University to bring Carol on and work on this program and be a liaison with the public agencies, the regulatory world. Those relationships that are strong in her networks are going to be essential for the William Penn Foundation's success and the success of the organizations we're supporting as well in this program.
Over here. You mentioned how you've reached out and are working with the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. Have you also reached out to talk to leaders of other foundations and corporations to help them understand your work and to bring them along?
That's a very good question, and so the answer is yes. As we developed this strategy, we had a number of gatherings where we had experts who were involved in helping us. We didn't have a group, sort of external people help us develop our plan per se, but as we developed our strategic plan, we invited various agencies and funders to come in to talk to us, for us to explain what we were doing and what we were thinking, and then we used their input to change things. So that was sort of in the strategic planning process, we did that. Then when we invited proposals from these 8 watershed clusters, we had about 45 outside experts who were from the private sector, from state, federal, and regional agencies, and from other foundations help essentially interview representatives of each of these clusters who were just explaining their plans and what they were trying to achieve, and we used that to inform which grants we funded. And then we ultimately funded 49 grants to implement, and all of that was based on input that we'd had from that sector. And so that's sort of like having people help us think about what we're going to do. What we're also interested in doing, which is more labor intensive, is now really going out and developing those relationships so that we can look for opportunities with private funders and public sector to come and do work and actually fund work themselves. So we don't want to do it in a way that we're saying, because William Penn's doing it, you should do it. We'd like to do it in a way that we have this exceptional monitoring framework that if you have any interest in water quality or habitat, you could do your grant making plugged in to take advantage of the monitoring. And also we have 49 really strong grants on the ground in very targeted places that is related to work that is aligned and where these plans that each cluster did has other work. We're not funding the entire plan. So we're really trying to draw people in to fund other parts. So it's a little complicated, and we can't, meaning, again, I keep saying we have a small staff. It's something that we're really committed to doing, and again, we're hoping to work with Carol Collier at the Academy to do the outreach to agencies and to the private sector, and then we'll be working with other funders.
We have time for 2, maybe 3 more questions, and we just had a request for folks with questions yet, if you can stand and identify yourself when you are asking your question. So, like I said, 2, maybe 3 more questions. If you have a question yet and haven't gotten to you yet, please raise your hand so we can get in the last few.
Hi, I'm Bill Reichert, Schuylkill Headwaters, way up at the top end of the Schuylkill. So I come up with an idea or something that I think would impact the whole watershed and stuff like that, not being in one of the cluster areas. How do we contact you or the foundation to get our ideas forward?
So you can, there are, I guess, 2 ways. One way is you can contact Nathan or me or Claire Billett, our colleague who couldn't be here today, but who are working on this, and you can get our email addresses through our website, and it's probably most effective to contact us via email. And then the other way is that it is possible for anybody to go onto our website and submit an idea via our application process, an inquiry. That's a good avenue, but I'd strongly encourage anybody to talk to us first, because we really, as you can tell, we have very clear ideas of what it is we want to fund and where, but we're really interested in hearing about other opportunities and other ideas.
I think another important route to discussing those ideas is also reaching out to the partners. The idea of partnering, the idea of aligning with these other organizations is really critical, and certainly it's embedded in our strategy that we want the work that's in these clusters to be exporting their successes, out up to the headwaters of the Schuylkill, and certainly taking the best practices from your region and from the region of others and incorporating them into their work. So absolutely reach out to them. We'll be making a public press announcement about the project over the next week, which will have a list of those organizations, and get in contact with those folks as well. They know the work best of all.
Good morning. Julie Kohler with the Water Resources Education Network with the League. We network to help build coalitions of drinking water systems into collaborative efforts. We have a number, I just returned from a meeting up in the upper part of the watershed. There's a group of them that own fairly substantial watershed forested lands. And there is a lot of interest in how to put in conservation easements and look at best management practices for managing those forested areas. I'd love to network with whomever of your providers is working in that area so we can connect with some of those folks to put them together kind of along the lines of what the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy is doing. They have a source water protection focus in getting those conservation easements. So I'm here to ask for whomever's working in that area to please chat with me sometime today. Also up in the Pike County area, we've got a Pocono collaborative going. So these are getting underway. A lot of support from some of these water suppliers who own quite a bit of acreage. So we need to help connect that, the utility providers as well.
And thank you, and that's an important point, and that is part of the strategies in several of the clusters we're funding, connecting water utilities, and then it also will inform our approach to thinking about modeling and being able to make the case to water utilities downstream that protecting upstream. So I'd suggest, I mean, we're happy to talk to you anytime, but Bill Rawlick at the Open Space Institute is handling the land conservation element of this work, and also Bud Cook at the Nature Conservancy up there has just gotten, that's one of the organizations that's recently got a grant up there. I think Natural Lands Trust, I think, is active, engaged up there as well. So there are a number of partners you could communicate with to sort of begin to figure out what the best connection would be. But you're welcome to contact Nathan or me first if you want.
Thank you both.